Welcome, everyone. I'm Peter Vis. I'm your moderator for this webinar, and I am a senior advisor at Rudd Peterson Public Affairs in Brussels, and I was formerly an official of the European Commission. So we're really delighted to have a group of panelists today. Today's topic of the day is the hybrid heat pumps and biomethane as solutions of the European building stock, for the European building stock. The panelists we have include Pierre-Louis François, who's CEO of Groupe Atlantique, Giulia Cancian, the Secretary General of the European Biogas Association, Denver Rumney, Group Innovation Lead from E.ON, and Galin Gentchev of the DG Energy at the European Commission. And of course, we have also with us Federica Sabbati, who's the Secretary General of the European Heating Industries Association. And Federica, perhaps you can introduce the frame, the session. Just before you start, I will welcome everyone, of course, and welcome everyone to ask questions if you wish on the chat, and we will try and pose those questions to the panelists during the course of this hour-long webinar. So Federica, you have the microphone. Thanks.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Peter, and thanks all my panelists and participants to this webinar. This webinar takes place in the context of the Repower EU communication. So this response that the European Commission has only a few weeks ago published in response to the worsening of the energy crisis that we have in Europe, particularly due to the fact of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and it's a communication that aims at really trying to find some faster solution, let's say, for both the climate goals that we have and particularly looking at the energy independence of Europe. So we wanted to discuss particularly what it means for the heating sector, but looking at making a spotlight on a technology, which is what you mentioned, Peter, hybrid heat pumps, that are particularly interesting in this framework. Heat pumps in general have been targeted specifically in this Repower EU communication. There is a specific objective to increase the penetration of heat pumps in the European building stock reaching a target of 10 million heat pumps in the market in the next 5 years. And but also the communication talks about green gases, and particularly puts higher targets for the supply of green gases such as biomethane and hydrogen in the European markets, really to be able to replace the quantities of natural gas that we are importing as Europe, and trying to find a solution, particularly for the energy independence issues that we have at the moment. So as industry, of course, we are very happy that there are targets specifically for buildings, and that some of the technologies such as heat pumps have been singled out. There is an increase in the market for heat pumps in Europe. Last year in 2021, we managed as industry to install for the first time the target of 1 million heat pumps. But as I said, the target going forward in the next 5 years is very high. On the other hand, there are some constraints for particularly certain types of buildings. I mean, heat pumps are very good in a lot of types of buildings, but they also face some difficulties in particularly for the renovation market. So hybrids are a particular solution for this, and in combination with biomethane, they can provide a solution which is fully in line with the decarbonization goals for the building sector. And this is why we wanted to bring these two aspects together. and therefore discuss with the representatives of the various industry from ourselves, for the manufacturers of heat pumps and hybrid heat pumps to the biomethane, as well as to look at a bit the system approach and look at what the energy grids are doing and what their concerns and how their solutions that they're looking at are formed. So this is a bit of framework in which we are talking. I very much look forward to the discussion. So Peter, thank you so much for moderating. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Federica. I mean, I'm going to say it because I'm sure everyone who's on this call knows that a hybrid heat pump is one that can work with both electricity and gas. That's just to be absolutely clear. Now, first of all, I'm going to ask Pierre-Louis François to give us a quick introduction to heat pumps and how much you can do to help heat pumps get everywhere, hybrid heat pumps get everywhere. Pierre-Louis, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. So hybrid heat pump, as you know, and as you described, is a heating generator that can also produce most of the time sanitary hot water. And it is composed of two complementary parts, an electric heat pump, as you said, and usually a gas combustion engine. Usually it is a monoblock system. I mean, we deliver fully the generator already here, hybrid, and sometimes also it can be done by the installer, you know, with what we call an add-on. I mean, a gas product on one side and the heat pump on the other, and then the installer makes the combination in the show-free. But usually it is, let's say, monoblock, to make it short. Of course, it can be domestic for individual house or individual flat, and it can be also collective for a collective building in a show-free with higher power. So as Federica said, it has a big advantage to reduce and even potentially to completely decarbonize the installation if we go with biomethane and or hydrogen, for instance, to fuel the gas engine. Usually, to make a proportion between the heat pump and the combustion engine, it's between 70%, the heating and the hot water comes 70% on average for the heating season from the electric heat pump, 70 or 80%, between 70 and 80. And the combustion engine, the counterpart, which is 20 to 30%. And of course, if the 20–30% comes from biogas or hydrogen, that makes full decarbonization. If not, still there is some CO2, but of course much less than with with a gas boiler. Only 20–30% of a gas boiler CO2 emission. So that's the main advantage. Second advantage, but maybe we will go further, is the reduction of the peak load, electricity peak load. But what I would like to stress upon right now is that it has also advantage for the consumer, for the end consumer, especially for the running cost, because you can optimize your electrical subscription. I mean, usually in the retrofit market, heat pump are 10, 12, 16 kilowatt. And in that case, with hybrid heat pump, you can have only 4 or 5 kilowatt of electricity heat pump. So that lowers your subscription. Second, if you have the right tariffs between electricity and gas, you can optimize depending on what the utilities deliver as potentially tariffs. And last but not least, it's also investment cost, because as you know, a heat pump, let's say a good heat pump, usually delivers 50 degrees hot water. And if you have an installation and not so much, if you cannot isolate your house or your apartment, then the only option is either to change all the radiators to have low temperature radiators, and of course this is very expensive, or you have to purchase and install a high temperature heat pump, which is also much more expensive. So the investment cost for a residential that is not so well isolated, the investment cost is lowered, and also the running cost potentially if you subscribe the right tariffs.
That's really great. And it really speaks to the fact that the hardest part of the buildings to decarbonize is the existing building stock.
Absolutely. Yeah.
None of our houses were built optimally if they were built 20, 30, 40 years ago, how they might be built if they were built new today. But what do we do? Do we have to demolish, reconstruct? No, we're going to rather adapt. And this seems to be a solution that would be quite good in that context. So one of the crucial things you mentioned was that if you use the gas component of this hybrid heat pump, the gas can be biomethane. And that, of course, well, Giulia, perhaps you can explain about the biogas, because, you know, how green is it? I think that would be the question most people want to know. Over to you. And how much of it, might I say, could you produce, Giulia?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, on the first bit, I would say biomethane, it is green and is renewable. As you probably know, we have to respect a series of strict sustainability requirements that are embedded within the Renewable Energy Directive, already the RED II, and that are on the table of the Parliament at the moment and will be revised very soon. Regarding the availability, that is a more complex question that looks on one side of what we have already in terms of feedstock available, but also what we can mobilize and what kind of regulatory framework we need. So starting from the start, the REPowerEU introduces an indicative target for biomethane to be reached by the end of 2030, which is 35 billion cubic meters. In our opinion, this is a very ambitious target, but it's also a credible one. And considering the current situation, it's rather timely. So just to give you an idea of the biogas and biomethane sector today, so our production is of complexively of 18 billion cubic meters for biogas and biomethane together, and 3 billion cubic meters for biomethane only. So if we have to deploy 35 billion cubic meters of biomethane, we could substitute around 20% of the current Russian gas that is used in the EU, and saving 110 million tons of CO2 equivalent while at that. So the growth of the sector is quite positive at the moment, and biomethane grew by around 25% in 2020. But if we have to reach the target that is embedded in the REPowerEU action plan, we need to grow by 28% each year until 2030. So looking at the REPowerEU and the Fit for 55 package, the co-legislators have now a very hard task, because they have to make all the pieces of the puzzle to fit together. On one side, to disentangle from Russian gas, to achieve a more sovereign energy system, but also to put the EU on the right track to achieve the climate neutrality. When we look at the EU energy system, we need, first of all, to acknowledge the elephant in the room. So 50% of our energy goes to heating. And in 2020, 27% of final energy consumption in the EU went to households, and most of it was covered by natural gas. So put it simply, we need to be able to decarbonize our gas grid fast to make sure that efficient boilers and heating systems such as hybrid heat pumps, for example, can run on green molecules. And in this context, also making sure that guarantees of origin system work and it's easy to implement and is widely accepted is a key condition for market growth. So as you said in the beginning, is there enough? So we're often asked whether there is enough feedstock to make this growth possible. And the short answer is yes. The medium length answer is that we have assessed the feedstock potential towards 2030 and 2050, and we can grow counting solely on sustainable feedstock, such, for example, organic waste, wastewater and sludge, agricultural residues, and sequential cropping. Clearly, we need to mobilize this feedstock and to make sure that there is coherence among the different regulatory drivers. I will only quote one. To date, we have a strict sustainability criteria, which are driving sourcing choices towards residues and waste, and specifically the greenhouse gas emission savings threshold that we need to respect are key in choosing the right feedstock that will go in our technologies and in our digesters.
Yeah. It sounds great. We're going to come back, have a few more questions later, but thank you very much for those remarks, Giulia. Now, Denver, heat pumps, they will use a lot of electricity, but these hybrid combinations, is there any particular advantage from the electricity perspective for there being a gas component? Over to you, Denver.
There is indeed. So this decade is one of unprecedented change where we must rapidly decarbonize on a large scale. Today, we're talking about heating, and yes, Peter, we're talking particularly about hybrids right now, but heating our homes across Europe is one element of the jigsaw puzzle. While we are scaling the delivery of heat pumps into residential homes, the homeowners will increasingly be turning to electrified mobility away from combustion engines, and so having charging stations connected in their homes as well to the same point of connection to the building. Perhaps they might also have photovoltaic panels installed on their roofs to offset their energy bills. The mix of these heating and mobility technologies place new loads on our distribution networks, increasing the peaks, which some of the colleagues have mentioned previously, which these networks must be capable of supplying. Distributed generation brings its own challenge as well to networks, where the export of this energy that isn't consumed within the home can impact voltage levels. So these challenges can be addressed ultimately by reinforcing the networks, but this takes investment and importantly time. 7 years on average to plan and execute a significant network upgrade. 7 years in a decade of accelerated energy transition. So this is the future we're all driving for. But this decade of change will also be unprecedented for the energy networks that distribute the electricity to our homes. There is variation across Europe's networks in terms of the spare headroom capacity. And where today there are already constraints on some, we must consider how best to decarbonize where large-scale delivery of air source heat pumps onto some parts of the network might not be possible within this timescale. When we consider that some other factors that, again, some of the colleagues mentioned previously, such as fabric insulation standards in existing homes, the existing heat emitters in the homes, and indeed the cost to heat these homes, then hybrid heat pumps should be considered in these cases if we wish to realize a fast and just energy transition. One other factor which I'd like to add is that of network resilience. The flexibility of two sources of energy afforded by hybrid heat pumps will be valuable to the grid as we aim to quickly reduce our reliance on gas, while potentially also enabling forms of energy that have been mentioned before, such as biogas and hydrogen, to reach market maturity. Now, the native logic within hybrids will steer the modal operation, and Jean-Louis can comment further on this, mainly based around price. But potentially, we can also send signals to steer them dynamically around these grid constraints, when and where necessary during this decade of transition, as we're trying to do all of the network upgrades that will need to take place. So we must always consider that there cannot be a one-stop single solution that fits all across our continent to heat our homes. And hybrid heat pumps should be part of the suite of solutions that we consider.
Yeah, I like that. Resilience is a buzzword, isn't it? And it's extremely more than just a buzzword. It really matters, and we can see that now in Europe. So, Galin, over to you as the regulator, if you like. Just a quick question. An indicative target of 35 billion cubic meters in 2030 at an EU level. That sounds very vague. Just it's a sort of indicative EU target. No member state is really responsible for meeting it. Is that going to be enough?
So thank you very much, first of all, for this opportunity to speak and to take part of this interesting panel and to see one of the possible uses of future biomethane. I'll build up a bit on the previous intervention, saying that even before basically the current crisis and the publication of the staff working document and the action plan on biomethane, it was clear from all the sectoral documents, also from Commission, like the EU energy system integration strategy or the hydrogen strategy, that full electrification would be either difficult or too costly to achieve. So clearly the vision for the future 2030, 2050 was a mix where also let's say different sustainable and diversified energy solutions have had their role to play, and also the projection for expected consumption, for example, for 2050 also showed about 20% possible consumption of sustainable gaseous fuels. So basically, we can say that the worsening of the geopolitical situation just played this catalytic effect, pushing us to actually act quicker. And from that point of view, also, if you look at the impact assessment for the hydrogen and gas decarbonization package, you can see that the projections show probably easily or realistically achieving something like 40 billion cubic meters of biogas by 2030. The point, there are many different issues to tackle, which are also covered in the plan. But one of the key points would be how to basically ensure a higher amount of upgrading of biogas into biomethane. As also mentioned, we are currently at 3 BCM, and we need to actually go up to 35, which is the key challenge. But overall, that's why we consider the target as ambitious but realistically achievable. Also, building up on the different raw material streams. I would like also to clearly state that it's also stated in the published plan that this is basically a target which is calculated based on waste-based paths. There is a potential of also some sustainable additional biomass being added to that on contaminated lands or other, let's say, used land and biomass for food or feed. But the main achievement of that target, we consider it possible through waste-based sustainable paths. I'll not have the time to enter into details, but the point of this target, as you mentioned, like a high increase in production and injection, means basically that we need to tackle all the different barriers, that's why the plan is quite comprehensive. You have 5 areas of action. I'll not have the time to enter into details. I'll just mention that some of the key actions on promoting the sustainable production and use of the biomethane involving all the levels. Basically, as you rightly mentioned, implementation is always at the level of member states, involving regional, local level of this, also decentralized implementation of putting more installations, producing more, and sustainably injecting into the grid. So there are key actions. In the first area, I'll just single out the probably the key action which we are about to implement now, to put it together biomethane industrial partnership as a platform where basically industry representatives, policymakers at EU and national level, together with the larger community, also NGOs, will have the opportunity to discuss the key issues, or let's say monitor the implementation of the target, and have the platform to discuss best practices in all the areas covered by the plan. We have also supporting action in this is the support from the Commission, also through this industrial partnership, to all member states to design their national strategies. And there you'll have also national trajectory, and this is considered key in order to achieve the target, since achievement is always at national and regional level, I would say. Among the rest, you have seen probably the plan covers all the aspects needed, lifting all the barriers, also looking into the needed adjustment of the integrated grid, also quality standards of the gas in order to ensure the flow across the board, specifically the regional planning, also in such a way as to basically ensure the extra, if we're successful what we're doing, there'll be an extra injection of biomethane, and in some times of, let's say, low demand, we need to have all the technical capabilities in order to ensure the proper functioning of the grid. So this is also covered by the plan, including identifying any gaps in research and further development needed on the different technologies, focusing on small scale decentralized production, for example, as well as integrating the already closed projects and what we have achieved on that. And at the final area, basically ensuring the proper financing, the mix between subsidies and financial instruments, for example. So this is like this, we cover basically, we hope, all the needed aspects in order to achieve it. And just on a final note, the link with today's debate, as also the communication stresses in the other parts of it, the focus, and as I mentioned at the beginning, is electrification, so electric heat pumps. But as already presented by the several presentations, there could be a margin also for hybrid systems for buildings which are not ready, not, let's say, refurbished and not ready in this transition period. And there could be, let's say, a market and a niche to be covered by this, combined with obviously with the sustainable biomethane supply in a transitional period, in this how to say, cost-effective and decentralized mixture of the future in order to achieve the full decarbonization. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Galin. So there are barriers, you've run through them, but despite those barriers, we are seeking a tenfold increase in the quantities of biomethane by 2030, which is a huge stepping up. And of course, a lot of it depends on the support, the subsidy schemes, the costs and so on. And that's what I just want to have a bit of a chat about now. Perhaps I could come back to you, Pierre-Louis. A basic question from my part, how much is a hybrid heat pump? What is the cost comparison with a pure electric heat pump? And are we talking amounts of money that every household can afford? And one of the questions we've got from John Taylor is, might they not be too expensive? Perhaps you can enlighten us, Pierre-Louis. Over to you.
You have to consider, of course, the total cost, including installation cost. So I take the assumption that the house or the flat is already connected to the gas grid, so that and the gas grid being provided by biogas or hydrogen does not change anything. So I take this assumption. If you take a heat pump, usually to convert gas boiler installation to traditional heat pump that delivers 50 degrees hot water, this will cost more. Well, total, the product itself will cost around 50%, 60% more than the gas boiler cost. But of course, it can be subsidized, which is the case, for instance, in France. But if you put aside the subsidies, and it's 50-60% more. We can say then the installation part is equivalent, a gas boiler and a heat pump, not much difference. If you have to change all the radiators, because once again, the traditional heat pumps deliver 50 degrees hot water. If you have to change all the radiators, then I have no specific assumption, because it depends on the existing installation, but it is very, very expensive. And most of the cases, it's not only a matter of money, it's just the fact that it is in reality not possible. So then you have the option to go for a heat pump, high temperature, or a very high temperature, and then you have to increase again 20-30% more than the cost of the traditional heat pump, let's say. While the hybrid heat pump will be similar to the traditional heat pump that delivers 50 degrees, because you have the combustion engine, of course, which is additional cost on one side, but on the other, the heat pump power can be lower. And as you know, in a heat pump is different than from a gas boiler. The power costs, I mean, 3 kilowatt heat pump is much less expensive than the 6 kilowatt, and also than a 12 kilowatt or a 16 kilowatt.
Right.
Usually an hybrid, you will have a 3 or 6 kilowatt electric heat pump combined with a combustion engine. And the cost of the combustion engine will be not so different, that the additional cost going from 6 kilowatt heat pump to 12 or 16 kilowatt heat pump.
So this sounds like good news. This sounds like
for the investment cost,
It sounds interesting from a consumer point of view, and big uptake is going to mean that costs have to be acceptable. Now, just over to you, Giulia, with a follow-up question, if I may. What about the costs of this biomethane? Would that be a more expensive product? I imagine so. And we're going to need a lot of it. So, I mean, there's tenfold increase or more. So we're looking at, are we looking at more expensive products that we also want more of? And do we want more expensive products? Giulia, about the cost, please.
Thank you. So first of all, it's a 12-fold increase, indeed. And regarding the cost, well, I think that we need also to look at the current situation and the current gas prices. If we consider current gas prices, my answer is no, it's not as expensive as one could think. We are looking at ranges. The cost of biomethane depends on the kind of feedstock that are used. Clearly, when we're talking about waste and residues, the cost of the feedstock is lower, but we might have a bit of a higher capital cost depending on the technology that we need to apply and the yields of the feedstock. So we're looking at ranges between 55 euro to 80, 90 in certain cases euro per megawatt hour. So it's something that you can at the moment competes with fossil gas. Also, when looking at the equations and looking at cost, we need to take a closer look at the EU ETS system and the cost of the allowances that will be charged on fossil gas that are already there and will be still in the future. So this consideration needs to be put in place. Finally, a consideration on the externalities, because when looking at costs, we also need to consider what kind of benefit goes to local communities. And as it was underlined before, when looking at biomethane, we're talking about circular systems. that are offering an opportunity to do a very efficient waste management, adding benefit from the communities where they are basically implemented. So I think that this needs to be factored in the overall equation of costs.
And I just let me ask one supplementary. Are you expecting that costs will be falling as your quantities of production increase? Just in the case of renewable energy, renewable electricity generation from whether that be solar panels or wind farms, the costs have fallen with scale. Are you expecting the same phenomenon in your business?
Of course, when scale kicks in, the cost is different, but there is a difference. Let's acknowledge it with solar and wind, which is the fact that we still need to use a feedstock, and this feedstock needs to be mobilized. Yeah. On the other hand, this also means more jobs that are going to the people that are working along the fragmented value chain. Yeah. But there is this main difference that we need to take into account.
Okay, but thank you for the clarification. Now, Denver, I'm gonna just ask a bit about grids. But one of the questions we've had from a participant is that can we use the existing natural gas grids for the biomethane distribution? I know that, hydrogen grids might have to be slightly different because hydrogen molecules are very small and inclined to leak. But in this case, we're not talking hydrogen, we're talking about the same chemical formula, if you like, biomethane with natural gas. So is there any problem of compatibility? I doubt it, but you correct me.
No, I would concur with what you're saying, Peter. So in terms of the very fact that what we're producing through biomethane is CH4 at the end of the day. So as long as there are no chemical constituents which could cause any problem in valves and any of the infrastructure themselves, I think the outlook is quite promising in that respect. Whereas versus hydrogen, we know that we can potentially get up to, I think it's about 15% mix into natural gas grids. So this seems, on the face of it, like a better option in that respect. Can I just come back to one point also, just on the cost of energy?
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to note that with hybrid heat pumps, many of the hybrid heat pumps, the native logic means that it will always favor at any time, any given temperature, the cost to produce the kilowatt hour of heat energy to the end customer. And I think this is a very, very important consideration, because as energy costs, especially in this volatile period that we're living in right now, can vary for electricity, for natural gas, for biomethane, etc. We know that the native logic can adjust the operation of the hybrid heat pump to work best in the customer's interests. I just wanted to add that point.
So in effect, you can have a little bit of demand response. Is that what would a hybrid heat pump enable a greater use of demand response in managing grid flows?
Well, we can do that also. Yeah. Actually, my own team that I'm part of in innovation, one of our main topics is exactly this, where we can actually control heat pumps and hybrid heat pumps and various low carbon technologies in and around the needs of the grid, and specifically with hybrid heat pumps. The possibility is there to connect and override the native logic in and around the needs of the grid. This could be very important in terms of scaled rollout of these products, where we know that existing constraints would limit the amount of hybrid or any other type of electrified heat, but where we can remotely steer under those peak load conditions to influence operation means that we can more quickly decarbonize.
Yeah, that's right. System costs might be able to come down if they're optimized.
Exactly this.
This is really exciting, isn't it? they become sophisticated, even more sophisticated than we might have thought as solutions to be deployed. So look, I'm going to come back to something, and I'm going to ask you, Galin, which is a bit tough. When I was in the Commission, I spent a lot of time working on biofuels. I can't say I ever enjoyed it. It was always difficult. And do some of the same problems arise with biomethane as have arisen over biofuels, in that, you know, basically we want fields to be available to produce food and feed, primary elementary need in the world and not just in Europe. So if we converted half of the agricultural land in Europe to producing biofuels and biomethane, would that be problematic? Or, you know, are we displacing problems by perhaps producing more biomethane in Europe, and for more food being produced elsewhere in the world, and perhaps pushing deforestation elsewhere in the world? Those are the sorts of trade-offs we've been struggling with in Europe for 20 years or so. Is this debate different this time? You have already mentioned that a lot of the feedstocks are waste feedstocks. Is that the story? Over to you, Galin.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned from the very beginning, and it's also clearly marked in the action plan, we are talking about I would say let's say majority of the target to be achieved by waste-based paths. There are also consideration about mobilizing. You'll see this. There is a specific action on this as well in the innovation part, on mobilizing in an innovative way additional biomass through, I don't know, using contaminated lands or degraded lands. This is something, there are a lot of projects already, and we'll try to basically integrate the results of those projects. There is existing maps where basically we can produce on those lands which have nothing to do with this debate, food, feed, and energy. On the rest, as you know, on the biofuels, it's not our debate today, but as you know, this was the reason to cap the biofuels. And also the devil is also the detail. We should, I think, get away a bit of this emotional discussion, since no one is, let's say, trying to take food or feed away from, let's say, replacing with energy use. I'll just mention that only 2% of the land is used for energy or for biofuels, and also that basically there is a decrease in the overall agricultural land. So it means that, let's say, there is abundant agricultural land every year. So for me, this debate is a bit more inflated. And on the second very important point, we should look into the complementarity of the system, the circularity which we are talking about, where basically you can combine feed production using the protein meal of that, let's say, biomass, and using the rest for, let's say, biofuels or other energy purposes. And that's why also the last point, the action plan clearly mentions the link with the cascading, with the different the hierarchy of uses, which is something also we'll respect in the implementation, in the national strategies, and in the real implementation on the ground.
As a sort of quick supplementary to you, do you think you could say that biomethane has a security of energy supply positive story to tell?
What I think, and I think that's when we were drafting the plan, that was our point of let's say, also considering the target, is that it's mainly about mainstreaming good practices that already exist. There are different business scenarios, if you want, on the circular business scenario, which could be applicable in different parts of Europe. Let's say, changing a bit the raw materials, depending also on the geography and the climatic conditions. Like as you probably know, this in south of Europe, there is this the concept of biogas done right applied, where you also use sequential cropping, but where it's not, let's say, competing with the land use for food feed purposes. Also in the north, you have other waste-based or grass-based technologies, also with small scale, where basically use the waste of the, again, using the protein from the grass, and just giving you an example, and using the rest for digestion. So this will be I think the effort, also through the member state national strategy, because this is the key for implementing. We can put something as a, let's say, a EU plan, but implementation is as important as the plan. So I think this will be something we'll try to, let's say, to push through the implementation and the different aspects in the plan.
I must say, if I can make a point, when I worked on renewable energy in the Commission, I did feel, and I still feel hearing this discussion, that it can be extremely good for a lot of regions of Europe that can produce renewable energy, whether that be wind farms or solar panels in Southern Europe, perhaps, and biomass in many of the farming areas. For me, this is something where jobs and growth can be distributed very widely. And all of these can be produced by us in Europe. And we've got the know-how and so on. So for me, it's something I do get excited about. I'm going to do a pause now and bring Federica. Perhaps have you managed to look at these many questions we're now getting on the chat? I've picked up one or two, but perhaps Federica, could you pick out one or other that's worthy of a discussion amongst us?
I mean, I would pick first the last one actually that I see, because it's interesting on the technology itself. So that's more for Pierre-Louis. When you mentioned that hybrid heat pumps work on a 70–80% part for the space heating on the heat pump, and this is sort of like a backup. What about the share for domestic hot water? And that's on the technical point.
Well, it is what you decide, in fact, and but usually, if you do not need hot water, sanitary hot water above 50 degrees, there is no reason why you shouldn't use even 100% the electric heat pump. If in the same time there is no need of space heating, but otherwise you can use the combustion gas system if you think you prefer a small tank at a big tank, and a small tank need to be reheated more regularly than the bigger tanks. So I said there are several options. You can be from 70–80% and even 100% if you choose to do so. But I would say for sanitary hot water, on average, it would be equivalent to space heating on average, 70–80, and from the electric heat pump, and 20–30 from the gas combustion. But in fact, it is what we decide, both the energy utilities, the policy makers, let's say, on one side, and the manufacturer on the other. And then, of course, the consumer also. But usually, I would say it's equivalent, yeah.
I must say, it seems these are interesting questions, and what we will need is for a lot of non-specialists like me. When I want one of these hybrid heat pumps, I need to be able to ring someone who knows all the technical specifications that would be good for my house.
Yeah.
You know, the skills need to be there, and I know that this is often a bottleneck, but one I'm sure we're trying to address.
Yeah, but
Any other questions?
Yeah, the rationale is to use on a permanent base the electric heat pump, and to use the gas combustion engine when there is
peak load. Yeah.
Whether it is for space heating or for sanitary hot water is equivalent in a way.
Yeah. So this is exciting, I must say. But Federica, are there any other questions you can see?
Yeah, there's a couple that talk about, but this is more directed, I would say, to the Commission. I don't know if Galin can answer them, but there are some countries that are banning boilers based on fossil fuels, particularly for the new builds, so for new buildings. There's a question that says, okay, do you think this trend will also be impacting the replacement market, so the retrofit market, and in which case, would hybrid solutions be impacted too? Because there's part of a boiler, I would say. So I don't know if Galin can...
It's a hard question, but I think in the overall strategy, basically, as I said at the beginning, the focus is also in the power communication. The focus obviously for new buildings is low temperature technologies, so electric heat pumps. If let's say all the preconditions are there, that's why we discuss. And I think that's the core of the debate. What about the huge amount of other buildings? And I think this is in this kind of a diversified approach where let's say there is no one fits all solution. So I would say it's rather, and it basically does not impede this transitional use or use of hybrid systems. So but I would say for new buildings, let's say the strategy is more on the low temperature technologies and electric.
Yeah, but of course,
I think they're complementary, so to say. Yeah, sorry.
I think so too, really. I mean, the existing housing stock is of course, that's not going to be impacted by the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive standards. You know, houses like mine, they just need retrofitting, and you know, I think there's a lot of houses like that. So there's a huge market out there, I think, potentially. But clearly, if one day the combustion engine, or rather the combustion boiler, is going to be banned, then that's clearly going to be a bit of a showstopper for you, Giulia, and your business. But you'll probably make the case very persuasively that green gas is as attractive as green electricity, in that why should you want less of it if it's got certain versatility and certain capabilities that a pure electric economy wouldn't have. Giulia, do you want to respond?
I will give a very brief response to this and a link to my first statement. When we look at the task that we have ahead of us and looking at what the heating market represents on the energy mix and how much of it is actually renewable at the moment, I think that there is ample space for different vectors and different solutions to decarbonize heating. We're lagging behind tremendously on heating compared to electricity, and therefore, of course, part of it will be electrified, and there will be a certain electrification of end users. But we need to make sure that we have all the possible solutions in our deck to achieve the target that we have ahead of us. So electrification is a good solution, but not the only one. We need to mitigate.
Would you agree with that, Denver? You're an electric man, aren't you? Or perhaps not. E.ON's surely many things.
Well, I have a background in gas as well, you know, so I'm quite mindful of all sides of the discussion. I would agree, you know, and I come back to something that Galin mentioned in that the new build homes will be appropriately heated by low temperature heating solutions. The reason for this, and it links to something that you said, Peter, was that the fabric insulation value of these homes is supportive of this strategy.
Yeah.
But where we look at existing housing stock, that's where we have to consider the holistic energy picture and the investment costs attributable to that. We have to design networks around peak load conditions. Those peak load conditions are coincidental with colder weather patterns. And at those times, we can utilize diversification of the energy picture with different forms of energy input to enable our whole energy system to be more affordable and more resilient.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we're getting towards the end. You know, we've only got about 5 minutes left. So, supposing you were each to make a sort of concluding remarks, perhaps picking up something that hasn't been said or emphasizing something that has. Pierre-Louis, may I start with you? Your closing comments? Your microphone is off. Your microphone's off.
Yeah, is it good now?
Yeah, it's good.
It's good, yeah. Okay, thank you. So if we look at numbers, last year, according to EHI statistics, hybrid heat pumps were almost equivalent of 10% of total heat pumps, and with a very strong growth. I mean, the heat pump market overall in Europe grew by 46%. This is the official number. And the hybrid grew by 207%. So a much faster growth than the heat pump itself, which already 46 was quite a number. So I would say I'm rather optimistic, and I hear the two countries that are being really the most promoting hybrid were Netherlands and Italy up to now, but we hear that Germany is now almost has decided that hybrid will be developed in retrofit market from January 2024. This is, and of course, this is only in 1.5 years. And still France is a little lagging, and UK also. So my message for also French authorities and British one were to go and to keep the move, I would say.
Yeah. Well, thank you for putting UK in the picture again. We missed them sorely. Giulia, would you like to make, in just 1 minute, a quick concluding comment?
Yes, thank you. So I hope that policymakers and in general co-legislators will look at the Fit for 55 package, including the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Performance of Building Directives, and the gas package through the lens of the REPowerEU. We need to also reconsider and complement the priorities that we have on the table for energy in the European Union. And we need to do it as fast as possible.
Yeah, I'm sure Galin and all at the Commission are working as hard as they possibly can. Vendra, would you like to make a concluding remark?
Sure. I just want to re-emphasize the point that we're now on an unprecedented energy transition. This decade of change is like nothing we've ever really experienced. And I think it's very important to recognize that, you know, we have huge variation across energy networks in terms of capacity and housing stock in terms of how they can affordably and resiliently be heated. I think we need to keep solutions on the table rather than just eliminating them. And the diversity of supply through things like biomethane, etc., alongside wide scale and considerable electrification is all very, very relevant and important.
Thanks so much. And Galin, would you like to conclude very briefly? Thank you very much for coming into the show, as it were. A lot of work's on your plate, I know. Galin.
Just very briefly, I think all this debate, and I fully much agree about the diversification needed based on energy efficiency, smart grids. So I think our debate is still valid for the overall decarbonization strategy. We cannot make it only through let's say, renewable electricity. This would not be possible. So we need just to find the right mix and also deploy it in a how to say also socially important way, and also from the point of view of creation of employment, multi-stakeholder approaches, and putting the different layers. So I think all the different social economic aspects to put together in a cost-efficient transition, I would say.
That was absolutely amazing. Look, thank you everyone for following this webinar. Thank you for the questions that we've had, plenty of them, which is brilliant. Thanks to the panelists for joining us. It's been a great discussion. And thanks, Federica, to the EHI for having organized and hosted this webinar. So anyway, we're on the hour. Thank you very much for having listened. And I hope to see you at one of these events soon. Okay, have a good day then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Peter.